Welcome to episode 1 of Gargoyle's Reading Hour. I'm your host, the Gargoyle, the reader on the ledge. Now, the first thing you're going to be thinking, where's the light? What's wrong with your camera? Nothing at all. A, I have a face that could make a vulture back away from a shit wagon. And B, I want the words to speak more than the person behind the camera. The way this is going to work, I'll be reading 2 chapters of, start with my own work, and then I'll be introducing more great authors, with their permission, of course, over the following weeks. So, sit back, relax, and let the darkness unfold you. I am Gargoyle, the reader on the ledge. Tonight, we are reading 2 chapters of some of my work. It's called The Rocher Redemption, an unpublished and probably never will be published work. I hope you enjoy it. The sun sat lemon red, rays of scarlet dancing over the now eerily still waters of Victoria Bay. I had found myself a comfy spot by the bow of the junk, feeling the wooden ship drifting calmly through the late afternoon water. I still remember when the bay was teeming with life, fishing boats plying their trade, making their living off the once abundant stocks of sea creatures. I remembered the commercial ferries bringing scores of excited tourists to the main island of Hong Kong, their exuberant chatter now but a distant memory long forgotten. I was but a kitten when the red meteor struck and the shadows fell over the island. I sat deep in thought, grey paws crossing over on the deeply tanned wooden junk, and I thought to myself, as all cats tend to do, it was amazing how everything could fall apart so very quickly. Trying to push the unpleasant memory from my mind, I glanced over at the captain of the boat, an old merchant just shy of his 70th birthday. He tolerated my presence. Maybe he was just glad for the company, as brief as it was. Not many humans left on the island anyway, and those that survived only showed themselves in the daylight hours. Rest of the time, they stayed clustered behind their walls or in their high-rises, all looking down at the jagged shards of what was left of Hong Kong Island. I could tell what he was transporting: basic food relief and supplies from the outside world. Pity gifts from those too afraid to leave the mainland and step foot on my world. Then again, who could really blame them? The red eyes, the one with the fires burning inside their skulls, had turned Hong Kong into a modern-day nightmare. One that the outside world just looked on arms folded. Nobody cared about the survivors, except us. I folded my patchwork towel tightly around my body as I felt the late afternoon's dragon's breath creeping in over Kowloon Bay. I hated the mist and the constant rocking motion of the junk, but I had no choice in the matter. Had to go see the Kowloon branch of the Rocher on the far island to see how they were holding up. Though the northern island was not as badly affected by the great light, there were still reports of red eyes making their appearance now and again. The Guardians were running low on supplies when I last visited, but they were a hardy and resourceful bunch, those northern cats. I somehow always knew they would remain standing when the last wall fell on Hong Kong Island. Not easy to get along with at the best of times, but loyal to the bitter end. We had to do what we could to keep the spread of the disaster limited to Lantau and Lama Islands as the outside perimeter. If the Red Plague hit mainland China, it would go like an ungodly hellfire. If the outsiders were too cowardly to act and the survivors too weak to stand against the red eyes, well then I guess it was left up to us of a more furry nature. The junk started to slow down as the captain eased the sails back, stretching my admittedly slightly overweight body out lazily. I shook off the last drops of mist clinging to my fur and headed to the side of the ship. I knew the captain would not dare set foot on the main island, and that the cargo would be thrown overboard to drift over to the coast, to be collected by whoever was fast and resourceful enough to get their hands on the precious food and water supplies. Would have to employ some acrobatics to not get my paws wet here. Easier said than done. The captain scratched me behind the ears as he heaved the last crate over the side of the junk. To him, I was just a stupid cat that liked to ride on the rickety wooden boat from place to place. Little did I know, I was one of the last remaining ones, holding back an almost impossible wave of destruction and anarchy. Come on, lazybones, let's get going. With my tail swishing from side to side, I measured the distance from the boat to the first crate. Landing in the water would do wonders for my rep with the others. Bunch of laughing hyenas. I would never hear the end of it, but my footing was sure, having done the routine how many times. Nimbly, I pounced from crate to crate, steadying myself before jumping again. The captain of the junk did not stick around for long, turning the boat around and heading back to the safety of the mainland. Even from this distance from the coast, I could smell the aromas of ginger, spring onions and soy sauce drifting in the air. If I moved my furry butt, I could still snag something from one of the local eateries. The Dai Pai Dongs usually closed at 5 in the afternoon, giving the shopkeepers just enough time to close up shop and run for shelter before lockdown. But there was always something left over for an inventive and resourceful cat to snag off one of the left-behind woks. Can we focus, perhaps? The thought of food had temporarily distracted me, and I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have. Riding the one crate, pushing along briskly by the evening wind, I drifted closer to the remnants of the small fishing community. It should have been filled with laughter and the sounds of music coming from old radios, but it had fallen quiet now. Most of the Tanka people perished as they tried to escape the blast, vaporized as they stood on their boats, frantically paddling to safety. Hundreds died on that day, gone without a trace. Some say they just turned into dust, others that their bodies floated to the bottom of the bay to rot away into nothingness. The fishermen outside the blast radius simply never returned home, sailed away to distant countries to start a new life. Well, that's what I heard. With an indignant meow, I jumped off the last floating crate and landed on an abandoned fishing boat. Deathly quiet, and rusted away. The boat floated by itself, tied to the other boats for all eternity. The chance of running into a yin-yai, red-eye was the common English translation, was remote at best, but there were always scavengers about, ones that would not say no to a tasty cat supper. No, the red eyes only came out when the sun went down and the shadows grew long. Then they owned Hong Kong Island, and pity the poor fool caught outside after lockdown, torn to shreds before being reduced to ashes. I did my best to avoid ending up like that. Carefully, I shadowed through the myriad of wooden structures interlaced with bright wall panels. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught the briefest glimpse of a skeleton lying prone inside a room. He was still clutching a faded family portrait, mouth agape, eyes sightless. He never had a chance to run or find his family. Killed instantly when the red meteor came down, I often wondered, as I passed torn fishing nets left behind, if any other countries on earth suffered the same fate as Hong Kong. If also had their versions of yin-yang and how they coped with it. You cannot worry about them now. You have survivors to take care of. My inner cat voice of reason, as annoying as it was, usually kept my furry behind out of trouble, and more importantly, out of the pot of any would-be scavenger. I was making excellent time, taking my usual route through the dilapidated fishing village, the one I had gone through unscathed 1,000 times, when I froze in my tracks, the hairs on my back standing on end, and my cat senses going crazy. Yes, like that silly movie. Peering around the corner, whiskers twitching in agitation, I spied the most unpleasant of sights. Rats. Of all the things that could possibly survive the blast, why did it have to be rats? Filthy, disgusting dumpster hamsters of the most vilest of natures. They were parasites that somehow clung to life after the meteor came down. Some of us even suspected they were in league with the Red Eyes, but none of us could ever prove that. What they were, though, was dangerous. One-on-one, I would have little trouble with the pests, but a hunting pack of 10 or more, they could take down the most grisly of street cats and leave nothing behind. Best was to leave them well alone, do their little ratty business, and go on your way. It wasn't just worth getting into a scrap with a diseased filth. I was just about to do the sensible cat thing when I overheard a scrap of their conversation. Of course, I was fluent in rat. It always paid off to be fluent in a second language, be a dog, a mongrel language at the very best of times, or those that carried black death and all sorts of unhealthy things with them. Pausing, I listened intently to the curs, already disgusted at the amount of spit flying around between them. I only had to hear one word for my hair to stand on end. Hero. By Lee Shaw, that's all I need in my life. It was a rare sight on the main island, but now and again we had some dumbass with a hero complex thinking that he could take the Red Eyes on. They would turn the poor fool into sausages in seconds, no matter what type of homemade weapons he had on him. I knew what I had to do. Raise the alarm under the Roishi, put every cat on overwatch alert, and get the misguided bastard back home safely. I waited a few seconds to hear where this act of lunacy was going to take place. I didn't have to wait long. The central escalators, right in the heart of Xinjiang territory, and it was taking place as soon as the sun went down that evening. Move your ass, cat. A screen door slammed shut behind me, sending a clattering sound echoing through the abandoned fishing village. The rats instantly ceased their chatter and one went to investigate the disturbance. By the time the vermin poked his nose around the corner, I was a long-distant memory. Taking to the metal rooftops, I raced across the corrugated steel and made it to the docks in record time. The sun was just starting to set as the leftover flickering advertising lights started to shine on Victoria Harbour. Every second wasted was one step closer to the man's imminent doom at the hands of the Red Eyes. Luckily, we were prepared. All the shopkeepers in Hong Kong kept a bell hanging from the shop front. This was to alert the others in case of an emergency or to signal the start of lockdown. When the night fell and the humans seeked shelter from the horror, that is where we cats take over. I bounded around the corner and saw the innocuous bell hanging from the closed-up shop. Leaping up some leftover boxes, I clattered into the bell, sending echoes flying down the empty streets. I did not have to wait long to hear an answer, and was soon greeted by bells ringing out all over the island, a cacophony of sound lighting up the forgotten alleyways and darkest corners where most feared to tread. The humans hiding in their apartment buildings or behind metal doors knew not what to make of the strange occurrence. There simply was no answer. The bells were ringing. The Roishi, the guardian cats of Hong Kong, had come alive. Chapter 2. Scampering with everything I had in my tiny legs, I raced down the streets, past left behind fruit stands and jumping over stationary red taxis. I could hear the groaning and moaning of the Zhonglai below my feet. The sun had just started to dip below the horizon, and the horrors were starting to emerge from the sewers below. Despising the sunlight, the Red Eyes kept to themselves in the subterranean tunnels of old Hong Kong, only showing their faces when the moon started rising over the bay. I knew I had maximum 10 minutes before the streets would be flooded with Yonglai, and I had to be well clear by then. Power sliding around a corner, I saw an open window at Kyo Kai Dai Pai Dong. The cook often left it open for fresh air while he was working. It would suit my needs perfectly. Hopping on a couple of stacked trash cans and knocking them down in the process, I dove into the semi-open window. The smell of pineapple buns and steamed chili crab immediately overwhelming my senses. My mouth started watering as I took a moment to savor the amazing depth of flavors. The cook knew exactly how much soy sauce I liked on my brisket, even though he never knew I was one of his frequent customers. Ahem! I stared longingly at a plate of leftover chicken wings before pulling myself away. I suppose I had to go rescue the idiot before I could have supper. It was eerie hearing the kitchen so quiet. Usually it would be frantic with fires raging over woks and customers digging into baskets of steamed char siu bao. I made excellent time through the kitchen and quickly found the rusted grate behind one of the stoves. This was the life of a cat. We couldn't exactly go waltzing in through the front door, now could we? For all the guts and determination the Roosje had in them, we were still one of the smallest creatures on the island. We just had to use our wits and cunning to survive in this hellscape. Up the fire escape and across the telephone wire. Easy does it now. The first shards of bright yellow moonlight was painted across my back as I dipped under an air conditioner pipe. Already the red eyes had started to appear in the streets below, throwing trash cans around and thrashing anything they could lay their hands on. Nobody knew their purpose, except to destroy and maim that before their fire-lit eyes. Almost there, I dropped down to a concrete ledge and hopped over a metal railing. The Junglai were in full swing now, tearing the place to pieces on their nightly rant. Ah, there you are. I was wondering what was keeping you, Z, darling. A feminine cat-like voice purred up from behind the ledge in front of me. I paused and quickly ran a paw through my ears. It always paid to look one's best. Jamelia, a pitch-black Siamese cat with startling blue eyes, was sitting on the ledge, cleaning her nails and staring distantly at the carnage below. She was with me from the very beginning, pulling me from the apartment on that fateful day as a kitten. She was now a chapter leader of the island, and the scourge of many a rat and other denizens of the night that tried their luck with her. Ran into some pests down by the docks, can still smell their stench even now. I took my place next to her, trying to stay cool, and collected near her, which was never an easy thing to do. I know, she purred in a melodious sing-song voice, the one that could melt steel. It's worrying that the rats are on the move again. We will need to keep an eye on them. I nodded and motioned down to the street below. A middle-aged citizen came running along, dressed in homemade armor. The Hong Kong telephone directory had many subversive uses, and wielding machete. How's our boy doing? I asked in rapt attention. This one is surprisingly doing well. He looks like something a cat would have left behind after a great meal, but he's hanging in there. And what are the odds against his survival? I asked, with the slightest grin forming on my face. Come now, Z. You know it's never a good thing to gamble on a human's life, Jamelia answered with an indignant sniff, turning up her petite nose. I glanced over and stared at her intently, waiting for the Siamese to eventually break. The over odds has him not making it past the next book. What could I do? The weasels were giving great odds at him being turned into cat food very shortly. If cats could blush, then I swear she could. Put me down for 2 tins. The rest of the chapter did their work, yes? I asked seriously. Been herding him for a good while now, setting up barricades and shepherding him to a local point. The chapter is doing great work these days, Jamelia said with the faintest hint of pride in her voice. But even she knew what would happen if you got cocky out there on the island. It was a guaranteed quick demise at whatever lurked in the shadows. Good, good. And our team in the sewers? Standing by, as mangy as those things are. They know what they're doing. Oh, would you be dear and get that flower pot for me? I flashed a brilliant smile and pushed the ornately and rather heavy flower pot off the ledge. The timing was beautiful, and it cracked a red eye directly on the skull, just as it was coming behind the frantically running human. The horror did not get up again. Death by flower pot. The human was too overwhelmed by adrenaline to realize we had just saved his bacon. We watched on with great interest as he stumbled on blindly, waving the blade around like a lunatic. The man was definitely from the French part of the resistance, a lone nutter that thought he could take on the entire Junglai by himself. Bless his heart, he looked so brave yet so very stupid. 3, 2, 1. I mumbled to myself as a sewer grate opened beneath his feet. Down the would-be hero plunged into the depth of the sewers, his muted screams quickly a thing of the past, as the red eyes looked around frantically for any sign of the human. Flushed away, Jamelia remarked casually, folding her long black tail around her. By the time he wakes up, he will be sniffing sea sand. It should temper any heroic illusions he might have had. I'm getting worried that things are getting worse, that we won't be able to control this for much longer, I said somberly as the pack of red eyes moved further down the street. Then we will use all our 9 lives there, till there is nothing left. Jamelia stared after me sadly, the moonlight dancing in her deep blue eyes. She picked her words carefully, thinking it through before speaking. You have to let her go, Z. You cannot keep looking over her the whole time. She will fall eventually, and I hate to see what it will do to you. I glanced over at her and shook my head sadly. I cannot stop. And just like that, we departed again, leaving the night to the horrors and whatever chapter member was still on the prowl. It was somber thoughts that accompanied me on the walk home. I kept thinking back to my younger days when I was but a kitten. Remember the door splintering and the red eyes coming through, how she grabbed me and ran for the exit, how safe I felt in her arms, hearing the monsters tearing the room to shreds, even Jamelia appearing from nowhere, holding them back for a few precious seconds while we escaped. Try as I might, I could never shake the nightmares. They just kept coming back to me. I decided to make a quick detour before turning in for the night. Just had to see her again. Had to make sure she was okay. She was holed up in the Nathan Hotel, just a short jaunt away from me. Sorry for that. I took my time, cautiously moving through the streets, always listening to any sounds of danger. But all was quiet now. The main pack of red eyes had moved further away by now. One would never know when you would run into a hungry scavenger or a horror that got lost from the pack. Carefully, I moved up the fire escape of the building across from the hotel. How many nights did I sit there forlornly, wishing I could go up to her? She won't recognize you, Z. It's been too long. I thought glumly to myself as I saw a figure appearing on the 10th-story window. She had grown up so much lately, and I couldn't be more proud of her, leading the small pocket of human resistance. She moved with such grace, hands fluttering over the map on the wall, making such great plans that I feared would only end in tragedy. I must have sat for a good half hour, watching her pacing the room, admiring her fire and passion. She was still so young, but the responsibility she carried on her shoulders felt so unfair. The lives in her hands, immense. One day she will fall. I kept hearing Jamelia's words in my head, wishing I could just chase it away. Turning around in anger that I didn't have the guts to go up to her, I scampered down the fire escape and finally headed home. My sanctuary was an artist studio near the top floor of a rundown old bed and breakfast. The place was falling to pieces and was only held together by bird droppings and swear words. But it was home to me. Cautiously, I moved up the stairs, the flickering of broken globes guiding my way upwards, scooting around a puddle of brown water that was leaking from a busted pipe. I stopped just before reaching the halfway of my floor. I really wasn't in the mood for some slobbering thug to waylay me before I reached the door. When I was satisfied that all was clear, I moved swiftly down the corridor before nipping through the bent and broken door to my apartment. Untouched since that fateful day, I found that it was the only place in the city where I could truly lay my head down to rest, the safe memories of my early years outweighing the horrors of that one dark day. My master was still waiting for me, lying down on the ground with his arm outstretched, as he was reaching for something just out of reach. I snuggled closer to the skeleton, looking up at the empty eye sockets of the skull before curling up and falling asleep. My master would always be there for me. He would never leave me, I thought to myself as my eyes fell closed. feeling the safety of the skeletal hand near me. As we pulled back from the room left in chaos, faded paint brushes scattered on the floor and canvases torn to shreds, a little engraving machine stood in the corner, a single collar with a nondescript metal tag still hanging from the machine, the inscription never to be completed, the artist slaughtered where he stood, ending in a pile of crimson red blood on the floor. Hello, my name is Z. Z, the unnamed cat. Right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you like what I'm doing, please hit that bell, subscribe. I always wanted to say this. And if you want to hear any more of my work, I have 2 books out at the moment. The Girl's Guide to the Apocalypse and the Venom Protocols Book 1. Book 2 is coming on the 20th of December. I'm going to put a link in the comments just below. Take care, guys. I was Gargoyle, your reader on the ledge.